This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
I am Nick Lusanteg, Senior Manager for Sustainability here at Sustain.Life. And today I'm joined by Hannah Osofsky, a data analyst on our sustainability team. Hannah, how's it going?
Doing great. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing well. We've got Easter coming up this weekend, which is a big candy holiday here in the US. So I'm craving chocolate right now. And I heard you had a story for us about chocolate.
Totally. So this past week, we got the fourth edition of the Chocolate Scorecard, which I hadn't heard of before. The Chocolate Scorecard is this collaborative effort between, it's organized by the NGO called Be Slavery Free, which you can sort of understand their method and what their mission there. Um, but it's run by them, but it sort of involves a collaboration of a number of NGOs involved in chocolate monitoring. And they wanted to sort of come together and understand a ranking of the world's top chocolate companies and how they interact with the world leading chocolate cocoa producing countries.
I feel like most people would not think of chocolate as something they need to be concerned about when they're thinking about, responsible shopping at the store. So why do we need a chocolate scorecard?
Totally. I think just like coffee and tea, cocoa is a product that really kind of sits in the middle of a ton of sustainability issues. First, it's a raw good. It only grows in sort of specific tropical conditions. And the countries with those climates face really specific economic pressure to tear their forests down and grow a bunch of cocoa. So we've got all the same concerns that we have around industrial agriculture, like pesticide use and deforestation and soil degradation because of monoculturing. And then we've also got the human rights side of things. So most of the world's cocoa comes out of, or I will say over half of the world's cocoa comes out of Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And there's an estimated 1.5 million children in those two countries alone involved in cocoa production.
Both of those facts were very surprising to me. Both
Mhm.
that so many children are involved in the harvesting and the farming of cocoa, but also that the majority of the world's cocoa actually comes from Africa, because I would have
Mhm.
guessed that South America was the primary producer. Also, when you mentioned deforestation, that made me think of there's a study that came out a few years ago that quantified the greenhouse gas impacts of different foods.
Mhm.
And I remember that chocolate is the highest impact non-animal product food on the list. So the list goes like, it's like per kilogram of food, it's like beef, mutton, pork, and then chocolate.
Wow.
And a lot of that is because of land use change. So definitely get that aspect of it. Um,
Absolutely.
you mentioned coffee and tea. And I know in coffee and tea, like chain transparency is a big deal. Is that also an issue with chocolate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're dealing with a major consumer good, and that just means that the the world is not looking upon chocolate companies with a super critical eye. Person you're buying chocolate from has gotten it from somebody else who's gotten that from somebody else. And
Mhm.
and the it's really common to see a really massive company not have any idea where their cocoa is coming from. And it's a $60 billion industry that isn't facing massive quantity of sort of demand for answers to these questions.
Okay. So it's not even that companies know that they may be buying from producers that are doing things either unethically or in unenvironmental ways, but those companies may not even know at all where
Yeah,
their cocoa is coming from.
it's totally possible. Specifically, I mean, somebody has to buy the cocoa pod. There's got to be another person providing sugar and another person providing cocoa butter. So the steps that can be broken into a bunch of different suppliers are they're endless.
Yeah. Okay. Crazy. Um, so other than like flavor, obviously,
Mm.
what else do they look at on the chocolate scorecard?
Yeah. So before Slavery Free really created this one chocolate scorecard, a bunch of different NGOs were trying to do the same thing, but specific to certain topics or certain countries. So now we have this scorecard, which tracks all of this information across multiple countries and multiple topics. But the topics that they focus in on are traceability, living income, child labor, deforestation and climate, and agroforestry and agrochemical management. And so
Okay. So
cut
there,
there.
yeah. So I think we kind of understand what living income and child labor is about. That's
Mhm.
about like making sure that everybody makes a living wage and like there aren't children working in the
Mhm.
industry. What does traceability mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we touched on this a little bit already, but chocolate travels a lot. And as it makes its way through the world, the eventual companies, especially the companies that are held accountable in this scorecard, are not the only companies that have held your cocoa. So traceability is just the word assigned to all of the kind of the path that cocoa has taken from the plant in Ghana to the grocery store aisle. And like we've already talked about, companies just don't have the answers to all of those questions. But
Okay,
the companies that do have the answers to those questions are ranked much higher in this.
so that's really getting at that supply chain issue and all those layers of the supply chain that we just talked about. Makes sense. What about on the environmental side?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we talked about, if you are in a climate that can grow cocoa, you're facing a lot of pressure to grow as much cocoa as you can. And the deforestation impacts are terrible. But what the deforestation section of the survey that the chocolate scorecard created really hones in on whether or not a company has an awareness and a policy that addresses deforestation. So if you've got a policy commitment that says you are not procuring any more cocoa from companies that are continuing to knock forests down in order to grow more cocoa, then you're scored higher. And if you can prove that you've got compliance and monitoring mechanisms in place to ensure that that policy is followed, you're scored even higher. Companies that don't have a policy in the first place, or maybe do have a policy but have no monitoring mechanisms, are obviously sort of progressively lower on the scores. And then on the climate side, it's really kind of the typical things that we see from SBTI and CDP. Just have you set a climate target as a company, and are you working and making progress towards it?
That's great that they're like aligning with the other frameworks that we always talk about. So
Yeah.
there's credibility to their scoring. Um, okay, so we've got like the supply chain and traceability, living wage, income, child labor, and then three categories for the environmental stuff. So it sounds like a really robust standard. How did some of the brands out there fare on this year's scorecard?
Yeah, that was the first question I had when opening up the scorecard. It was pretty fun. So a lot of the brands that scored really, really highly, and they get this little good egg consideration. Those are brands that you've maybe seen, but they're definitely going to be a little bit more of an expensive product. So we've got two companies, one called Original Beans and one called Tony's. Tony's is that, the huge chocolate bar that you can
Mhm.
see
A really colorful label.
sometimes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they scored really, really well. They got sort of leading industry and shooting above industry standards across all of those categories, except for Tony's, which scored lower in agricultural management, but still top two. And then riding in the middle were some of the ones that you'd maybe expect to see. So Nestle and Hershey's and Mars and Ferrero, just the really big producers. They're buying a lot of cocoa. And so they're buying a lot of cocoa from a lot of different cocoa farms. The traceability gets muddier. And then riding at the bottom were Kellogg's, Starbucks, Godiva, the chocolates that you can walk in and get for a really inexpensive cost, has real world implications, I suppose. And then sadly, Cadbury in the time of Easter chose not to respond. So
Wait,
we don't know.
so the chocolate scorecard, it scores people with an egg. That's their symbol. And presumably that's a reference to the Cadbury egg, right?
Really? I guess that would make sense. I mean, the
What
Cadbury
else would it
egg
be?
is the icon. Well, I suppose
There's
just eggs in general. But,
Oh, maybe it's just a
um,
reference to Easter in general. Okay.
yeah. So when you look at the scorecard, you've got different colors of eggs depending on how you behave in that category, and then your overall score is symboled with a sort of recognizable Easter bunny. So I think it's just Easter symbology and not
Okay.
necessarily chocolate.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say still Cadbury not weighing in at all is
Mhm.
a little concerning.
Yeah, no, it's definitely.
Cool. So when you're at the store this weekend and you're buying your Easter chocolate, check out the chocolate scorecard. Take a look at where some of those brands that you're looking at fall. Uh, thanks
Absolutely.
for thanks for joining us, Hannah. Appreciate your wealth of knowledge as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.